It's also a pleasure to introduce a person I think you're really going to enjoy hearing from today. Before I do that, I have an introduction of my own I'd like to make. Miranda Henderson, where are you, Miranda? She is, right here. Miranda is one of my local folks, and as you can see, she is carrying the newest member of Team Flores that will be here soon. So I'm not father, I trust me. But anyway, I've got to be careful how you say those things these days. But anyway, she takes care of things here in our Bryan office. I was originally going to be at a rock today. But two things happened. One is I found out that Kay was going to be here, and Kay asked if I would introduce her. And secondly, two of our Fighting Texas Aggie athletic teams were national champions, and they were in the White House last week, so I got to host them there. So I guess I'm much better off to be here than in Rock. I want to introduce Kay in sort of two ways. One is what you see in her bio, and there's a summarized bio here. In the program, and one of the first line in there says a leader in national defense and global security. Kay is that. But there's more too. So I want to give the official bio, and then I've got a couple of personal comments I'd like to add. She represents the 12th District of Texas, which includes Fort Worth and the western half of Tarrant County, part of Wise County, and all of Parker County. She's currently in her 11th term. She serves on the Appropriations Committee and is the chairwoman of the Powerful Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. If you don't know how powerful that is, talk to Mark Welch, and he'll tell you how powerful that is. He's a former military guy. Her subcommittee on appropriations handles over half the discretionary part of the federal budget. She's truly a leader in national defense and global security, as your program says. Prior to her life as a public servant, she taught high school journalism and English. She also opened and successfully operated her own insurance agency. Kay's public service began as a member of the Fort Worth Zoning Commission, and she was then elected to be the first female mayor of Fort Worth in 1991. Some of her top distinctions and awards include being named one of the 25 most influential women in Congress. I think she's higher than that. And elected to the Texas Women's Hall of Fame and the Fort Worth Business Hall of Fame. A couple of interesting factoids for you. Kay is the first and only Republican woman to represent Texas in the U.S. House of Representatives. I think we need to fix that, so I'm hoping that we're sowing some seeds here today. And she is an avid and accomplished painter. Her office is decorated with many of her paintings. Now, the second part of the introduction is more personal for me. Kay is a dear friend, and I consider her to be one of my mentors in Congress. And the way I got to know Kay on this more personal basis happened in 2011. I was a young freshman punk in Congress, and the country was going through redistricting. And we had a meeting as a Texas delegation on redistricting, how the Texas district's going to be redrawn. Well, I missed a meeting one day. And Kay grabbed me on the arm on the House floor the next day, and she said, "Bill, some of the people around here you may think are your friends are not your friends when it comes to redistricting, so don't ever miss another meeting." And so I have taken that advice to heart as much of her other as her other advice, and because she truly is a woman of wisdom. She's a great national leader. She's a strong Texas leader. I'd ask you to give a warm Aggie Land welcome to Representative Kay Granger.
Leadership and his wisdom, his demeanor, and he's made a great reputation. If you live in his district, you've done a great job, and we need to keep him in Congress. So I'm putting that plug in. Thank you for asking me to be here today. I love what you're doing at the Institute. It's just very, very important. I've worked for encouraging women to serve in government. I haven't done a very good job because I am still the only Republican woman that served in Congress, but I'm keeping the seat warm for one of you who's going to do it next. I kind of got talked into politics, and it's been a wonderful career, and I've enjoyed it very much because I've learned so much. It's a constant learning, and so that's what I've been about. But most of all, I was just intrigued when I got the letter to invite me about the title of the symposium, Women, Peace, and Security. And as soon as I got that, I started thinking back about my experiences, my life experiences, and I want to tell you sort of what I've been doing with women and peace and security and what I've learned. I've spent 10 of the most interesting years ever in my life working with women who live lives with no security. They battle insecurity all the time. And I was named to chair the subcommittee on state and foreign operations. That means all of the State Department and everything we do, our international aid, all of that. And when I was named to that committee, I said, but I've never served on that committee because I came in as the ranking member. And they said, oh yes, you have. You just don't acknowledge it. He said, you've been doing this really all of your life. So I did, and I came in as the ranking member. The Republicans won back the majority, and I became chair. I served then 6 years, and in serving with that, to really see what we were doing, I've traveled to 82 countries. So I've had an experience that I really would never have had. I stayed on state foreign operations because there's so much still to do and to learn. But now I do chair defense, and that is the one that decides how we're going to equip our military and support our military. Those two go together, and I don't think I ever would have understood, like I do now, that diplomacy is here and defense is here, and they work together. If we do it right, they work together. There are times that we can do more in a country by aiding and helping them. There are others where it takes the military, and that's where we've been with Iraq and Afghanistan. So I would say, in talking about peace and women and security, I think we have to talk about safety and women and all of that. Women of my age and women of your age are always aware of our security. We may not vocalize it, we may not talk about it, but we watch who we're with. I'm not afraid to live alone, but I live in a condo with very tight security. I park under the lights, and no one gets even on my floor without their calling, and I say, yes, that person can be let up. And that's not fear, it's just being secure. It's kind of like your financial security, that you plan things, and then you can live in a much more free way. That basic security allows me to have fun, to travel, and to work about 80 hours a week. And that's what I do because I love it. And my friends think I'm crazy to be working that much. But as I said, if you're in the position that I'm in, you're learning all the time and you're having experiences. That's what security means to me. And being safe is making decisions for my safety and my security. After we went into Iraq militarily, Governor Bush and the State Department asked me if I would assemble a small group of congresswomen and travel to Iraq to work with the women of Iraq and prepare them for the change. I did quickly found 3 other women that said we would love to do that, and we started sort of planning our adventure. Our purpose was to work with the women who'd be running for office as part of the government that was being assembled in Iraq. Most of them had never even voted, and now they're going to run to be elected by the Constitution because they said women have to be a part of this government in a percentage that was twice what we have as women in our House of Representatives and our Senate. They were unprepared for running for office. We were unprepared for meeting these women. There were Sunnis, there were Shias, there were a few Christians. There were also associates of terrorists. And we knew that because women would come up and leave notes in my chair if we had a break or between my pages and said, these people are writing down everything that you're saying, and you must be very aware of your safety. Some are wearing Western wear, some were completely clothed, all in black, and all I could see was the glimmer of their eyes. There was one woman that was elderly, I could tell by the way she moved. She came to every meeting, and she never said a word. And all I saw was the glitter in her eyes as she would watch me and write things down. They weren't prepared to be candidates because it was decided that women would be a part of that. The women didn't say, I want to run like we do. They didn't prepare for that. They just had different lists of candidates, and they would write women's names in. So, for instance, there were some women who, because of the danger of living in Iraq, they were lawyers and physicians and people of education, substance, because it became so dangerous to be in Iraq. As an educated woman, they had left, but their names appeared on these lists, and they came back just to run for office. Other women had their names on the list, and they were very frightened and very, very angry that their names would appear when they'd never been asked. They were frightened, and one woman, as we began, and as I said, we really weren't prepared for what we were listening to, but the first woman who spoke got up and she was very frightened. And when you're that frightened, you're also very angry. And she said, I came just to tell you, do you know what you're doing? Do you know the danger you're putting these women in? Because they're coming to a meeting and sign their name to listen to Women for the United States of America. She said, I only came to tell you that you should be very, very careful for yourself and your security, but also for the women that you're influencing. And she said, now I'm going to leave. I have no family here because they've killed my husband and all of his family. And she said, I'm going from this room and catch a plane and leave this place. And that was the beginning of that. So you can imagine what it was like as we progressed. I asked to take a break for us to sort of, the women of Congress say, all right, now how do we proceed? We came back and we listened to those women, the women that were frightened, the women that were angry, the women that were too afraid to speak, but as I said, would leave me notes and say, one woman said, I will meet you at 11 o'clock on the 4th floor at the north end and tell you who I am and who else is in that room that you should be concerned about. They were puzzled too because we were so far apart in who we were and what we do and what they were preparing to do. So a lot of it was listening. What they wanted, most of all, they wanted us to understand what they were going through, what their lives were like, what had been, and what the future they saw for themselves. And they wanted to understand what our lives were like. They wanted to know what it was like to live someplace where you had the freedom to say, I want to run for office, not someone just putting your name down and putting you at risk. They were curious, and they were also hopeful, but very tentative in their hope. They thought if they could understand what we had, they had the opportunity to work toward it. So we had a responsibility to explain it in a way they really could understand. And then everything wasn't perfect in the United States, but we did have freedom that they had had at one time. And I had no idea until I went there that at one time, Iraq, the women of Iraq, had more freedom than all the countries that surrounded them. They had careers, they went to school, they had all that. And Saddam Hussein began to destroy that. And that's when so many left. So I thought about that, safety and security, and what it means in my life and in your life to have control of your own security and live in safety. I won't talk about security in the lives of these women because there really wasn't any security. Security meant the people in uniforms that were holding guns to protect us outside the room where we were meeting. Safety was sometimes in their homes if they were lucky, but they really didn't have much decision making in their own families. There wasn't safety in the streets, and it wasn't in the shops, and they weren't safe at work because they weren't allowed to work. Their sons had been killed, many of their husbands had been killed. In Iraq, if you lost your husband, then you moved in with his family. So your mother-in-law was in charge of all the decisions. Sometimes that worked out, and sometimes the women were treated horribly because their mothers-in-laws didn't want other mouths to feed when they already had a family. And they talked about that. They also had risked their lives by participating in these meetings. And they wanted us to know that to say that they were going to a meeting with us, they had to sign up for that, put their names down. And so they wanted us to understand what they are risking and make it worth it to them. We had a responsibility, and we talked about that over and over before we went again, that we had a responsibility to live up to everything these women wanted from us because of what they were doing. In one of the meetings, the building we were supposed to meet in was blown up before we could meet there. And it became so dangerous with so many threats that we were going to have to call it off when the King of Jordan heard about what we were doing and offered to host our meeting and take over our safety. It took the women 13 hours to go through all the security stops, but we did meet in Jordan. And the King of Jordan became a great friend. In fact, next week, the week after we go back after Thanksgiving, he's coming to meet with me again. We meet every year, sometimes several times. And Jordan has been a great friend of everything we're doing. I became really deeply involved in training these women in the Iraqi government to prepare them, if they were elected, what they were asked to do. And I'm not setting myself up as someone great that did that. There's so many women who have done things like that from our government. In the last 40 years, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, I worked with her when she was Secretary of State. She's a brilliant woman, did a wonderful job. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who still calls and offers help, and she's a delightful person and takes everything she does very seriously and does it very well. You had Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick, of course, brilliant woman, and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. So we've had those women who have had international recognition, but there have been so many other women that have served in the State Department and done such a good job that you wouldn't recognize their names, but they take it seriously and have for such a long time. But this hasn't been that way around the world. Women have not always been at the table when peace negotiations have taken place. That's starting to change. Things really are changing for women. In the military, it's changed significantly. And when I go talk to the women in the military, every time they're more and more of a very high rank. I have a women's summit, I call it. It's a luncheon every year in my district. And it's a luncheon to thank all the women who helped me get elected the first time and then 10 more times. And it's just a report. And I tell them what I've done in the last year. And because I'm reporting, I said, thank you. And I feel like you've helped me so much. I want to tell you what you're getting for your support. As I was preparing for this year, I stopped and thought about all the women that were in defense now. Marilyn Hewson is the CEO of Lockheed Martin. Never had a woman CEO of a defense company like that. Deborah James, Secretary of the Army. Heather Wilson, Secretary of the Air Force. And Phoebe Novacek, CEO of General Dynamics. To think how many women are in defense, I thought about that. And so these 300 women that came to my summit, I had those women there and interviewed them and talked about all these, what they've done and how they got there. And their stories were really wonderful. As I was planning that, I thought back about a meeting that we held in Iraq. And the women still, they said, we don't understand what democracy, we understand what you tell us about democracy, but how does democracy work? Said, how does it work on a daily basis? So I thought about it, and I used a technique. I know you've done it. I said, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to number off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And all the ones go to table over here. You know how we've done that, and all the twos over here. And I said, here's the way what we're going to do. We have a lot of women that are battered by their husbands, their boyfriends, their families. And so we're saying we need a shelter for those women. And some community leaders have decided that really is what we need to do in our community. So all the ones are the community leaders who decided we need to build a shelter. And number two are the police that are really concerned because you're going to put all these women in one area and whoever's beating them up could really cause a problem. And then we're going to have the women that are in danger and could live in that shelter with their families. And then we're having the city council will make the decision. And last, we'll have the people who are adamantly against a shelter. So we did that, and as we started, this woman came up to my table, and she was hysterical. She was crying, she was shaking. She said, I can't do this, I can't do this. She said, I'm not for this. I said, it's just play-like. We're just play-like. We're not going to really build a shelter here. And she kept saying, they'll burn me to death. Well, what a strange thing to say. I said, you sit here with me. We're for this. We're against this, and so why don't you just join our table? But I talked to her and I said, why are you so frightened? She said, because I was one of the people where I live that thought we should build a shelter. And some of the women were burned to death, and that's why I had to leave and run away. Well, that will really bring you to your knees. That's what had happened to her. And I thought, here we are, we live through something like that, and we make the decisions, and we vote, and then people live with the decisions. That's not what she'd experienced. So when that's happened, I constantly found myself moving and changing the way I wanted to approach this. So I'm telling you and asking you to keep exploring this. Keep exploring women, peace, and security, because the world needs peace and security, but war isn't going to make it happen. Women might. That's starting to change, the women and the peace and security, because there's an act that was voted by the Congress called Peace and Security Act. It is an attempt to help change things even faster. Today I want to talk to you about the Women, Peace and Security Act and what it tried to accomplish. First, what it is, then how it works, and then why it matters. First, what is the Women, Peace and Security Act? Well, it was an effort by the Congress and the administration to ensure that women were involved in peacekeeping and security measures all around the world. Specifically, the law does three things. First, it highlights the connection between women's participation and the success of security. This is fascinating to me. Research has shown that when women are included in peace processes, it helps produce less conflict and more stability. In fact, one UN study found that when women take part in peace negotiations, the resulting agreement is 64% less likely to fail and 35% more likely to last at least 15 years. Those are pretty good statistics. The reason for this is simple. Women offer a different perspective. And the more women that are included, the more are invested in seeing that the agreement is successfully implemented. So it makes sense for everyone to have everyone at the table. Second, the Women, Peace and Security Act calls for the U.S. to create a strategy for increasing women's participation. The law mandates the creation of a plan to increase the participation of women in peacekeeping and security negotiations. It will also train diplomats and other government officials to include women in any negotiations they're conducting. And finally, the Women, Peace and Security Act acknowledges that women's participation isn't just the right thing to do, it's the only thing to do. Around the world, more and more countries are realizing they must include women in peace negotiations if the agreements are going to be successful. In fact, some 69 countries have created plans to help increase the role of women in peace and security. I've helped many of those countries. And third, let's talk about why Women, Peace and Security Act really matters, and it matters because women's lives matter. Whether it's in America or Afghanistan or Iraq or North Korea, women's lives matter. The women I worked with are learning about freedom and democracy, and I was learning about women who had very few freedoms and they lived lives of insecurity and fear. And the more I learned, the more I admired their courage. It came time to vote, putting a new government together. And the Sunnis were told they could not vote. The woman that I told you about, where I could only see her eyes and she never spoke, she was Sunni. And she emailed me and she said, they told us we can't vote, but I'm going to vote. And she got the women her village. It took them 5 hours to walk to the place where they could vote. And do you remember they put their finger in the paint? Remember that? And so if your finger was purple, it means you voted. It was one thing to walk 5 hours to vote. It was something else to walk 5 hours back where people knew that you were Sunni and you'd voted anyway. And she sent me an email and she sent me a picture. It was that kind of courage that I will never, ever forget. And it really changed the way I think. I've gone back. I've kept up with some of the women. We helped them not only to get elected, we said, now you've got to take the next step. And as you write the conditions for your government, you have to be in that room. You can't just be elected. You have to be on that board. And many of them were, and they continue to learn. It's a courage that I respect and changed my life. I'd love now if we have a little time if you have questions.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Okay.
Join you on the stage. Good afternoon. I'm Amanda Schnetzer from the Bush Institute. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Maybe I'll take the prerogative to ask the first question. Since you mentioned the Women, Peace and Security Act, Ambassador Russell was here earlier today. I don't know if she's still here. Oh, you're right there. There you are. We started a conversation about the act and the initiative of the Obama administration, which now has been enshrined in law. And the question I want to ask you about is that the passage of this law was very much a bipartisan endeavor. And can you talk about the significance of the bipartisan support for that, extending from one administration and now into the work of this Congress?
Because it's the right thing to do. And what we're watching, now all over the world, it seems like everything's on fire. It's a time that it's so important to have something that says, these are our values and this is what's important. And it wasn't just bipartisan women, it was bipartisan period. And that's why it's so strong. Now we've got to say, now how do we put it together and make sure it's put together and there's participation.
Excellent, excellent. Are there questions in the audience? See, I see one gentleman here in the back and then the young woman here in the purple, and maybe we'll take those two.
Yes, Representative Granger, thank you so much for your service and your support of both the state and foreign ops budget as well now as defense. On that note, can you give us some perspective on how you see the way forward for FY18 and going forward to avoid some of the big budget cuts that have been proposed for state and foreign ops?
Avoid some of the what?
Of the budget cuts that have been proposed for state and foreign ops.
it's going to be really difficult, and particularly, this is as hard a time as I've ever had in Congress because there's so much going on, and we have to be so careful. One of the things that it was announced today is that these terrible floods and all that we've had physically will have to take the cuts from something else. State Foreign Ops has to be very careful. There are many people still in the Congress that really don't believe we should be helping other nations, that diplomacy is really the wrong way to go. So usually connect that with defense so that we'll pass those bills. We're going to have to fight for those things. And those of us who've been involved have to sell saying we're helping when we're helping build a country. As the Secretary of Defense said, if you're not going to use diplomacy, you give me a lot more bullets.
Exactly. And the young woman in the purple sweater?
Congresswoman Granger, thank you so much for coming and talking. And it really is inspiring to see someone who's been a pioneer for women, especially in Congress and working on things like defense. So thank you so much. My question is more about kind of the logistics of what your job looks like every day in regards to what we've heard lately about all the sexual assault allegations. And I'm just wondering how that's affected you personally through being a woman in Congress and working in such a position where you're in power and you have the ability to speak out against those, and kind of what you see moving forward in light of all we've heard recently.
It's pretty shocking. I was thinking about that driving to the plane today, about you'll find a person, they say now 20 women have come forward, or in some cases 20 young men who were assaulted by a teacher or something like that. I think it's healthy to get it out in the open because then maybe there'll be changes. And so it really is affecting all of us. It's much more, I think, prevalent than I thought. We had some women in Congress who were all just sitting having coffee and talked about some of the situations we'd had, not in Congress, but as we went to work as young women, things like that. And I thought about that in security when I was talking about safety and security. As women, I think we're more careful about who we're with, where we're with, how that's taken, and I think that's healthy, but there's at some point, it hits all of us and makes us very sad.
Well, we're so grateful for your time. I know I found it fascinating to hear more about your engagements in Iraq. I know that you were at a briefing recently with Mrs. Bush and Mrs. Ghani talking about Afghanistan. You've been an advocate on issues of human trafficking, and we're grateful for your leadership. And like you, I hope we will see a lot more Republican women and Democrat women from the state of Texas who are serving in Congress. So thank you for leading the way. We appreciate it very much and your time.
Thank you.